Last year, the Toronto Raptors clinched the 6th seed and went up against Philadelphia in the first round. This year, they were the 9th seed and lost in the first playing game to the Chicago Bulls after being up 11 at halftime and at one point being up 19 points. And in this closeout game, or playing game, sorry, they had 34 free throw attempts, but only made 16. So they went 16 for 34 from the free throw line. In a 4-point game, even making another 10 free throws, 6 free throws, would have won them the game. They shot below 50% from the free throw line in a play-in game, which is basically a playoff game. And I think, as a Raptors fan and as just a general fan of the NBA, I think it's time for this Toronto team to just blow up the entire roster. I think Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet are great players, and I love them. And as a Raptors fan, I've enjoyed watching them play over the course of my time watching the Raptors and over the course of their time on the team. But I think they don't fit the timeline of the Toronto Raptors, because the Raptors have young guys, and even Gary Trent. Scotty Barnes was the number 5 overall pick, 4 overall pick a couple years ago. And I think that this team's timeline is a rebuilding timeline, and I don't think that Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet fit that timeline, because both of them are pushing 30 and don't have many productive years left as the number 1 or 2 option. If these guys were 22, 23 years old playing like they do right now, they would fit perfectly, but I just don't think that they fit the timeline, and I think it might be time for the Raptors to move on. Lots of people had rumors and speculations about the Raptors moving on from Fred VanVleet at the deadline, and also about Pascal Siakam at the deadline. So I think that both of those guys could get traded in the offseason for either draft picks or for different players that happen to be younger. Another thing that comes into question is the status of Nick Nurse, the head coach of the Toronto Raptors, because the Raptors coach has talked about possibly taking this offseason to think about what his future will be with the Raptors and whether he will return. And I think that this disappointing finish to the season might lead him to move on from the Raptors, and also the Raptors possibly to move on from him, because this team was up 11, like I said before, at halftime, up 19 at one point, and they just fell apart. And that's been a constant theme of the Raptors throughout the season. They'll go up by double-digit points and then just choke the lead. And it's just been a very disturbing theme throughout this Raptors season, because it just shows a lack of maturity and a lack of coaching when it comes to these big games. Another thing that comes into my mind when I talk about the Raptors is their lack of depth, because I remember looking at the stats at halftime for the Raptors game, and I think almost all 5 of their starters, possibly 4 or 5 of their starters, had played 20 minutes at halftime. That's almost the entire half of 24 minutes. And we have no bench. The Raptors have no bench, because you can't rely on anyone to have a scoring load. If you take Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, and Fred VanVleet out of the game, you don't have anyone to have the scoring load on their shoulders. So if the Raptors can trade Pascal and Fred VanVleet for maybe for players that can provide scoring depth off the bench, and then lean on Scotty Barnes and OG Anunoby to be those number 1 and number 2 guys in their rotation for scoring, and just the number 1 guys in general, I think the Raptors will be much better off. One other reason I think that the Raptors need to trade Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet is because Scotty Barnes was drafted number 4 overall a couple years ago and won Rookie of the Year. After that time, he has gone to either the 4th or 5th option on this Toronto Raptors team, and his scoring average dropped significantly this past year. And I just don't see a scenario where you're not building around him. He's your franchise player. He's your future franchise player, offensively and defensively. He is such a good defender, and when he is given the ball, he has displayed traits of just being a good scorer and a actually above average playmaker for a forward. And I really enjoy watching him play, but because of Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet being there, and those being the number 1 and 2 options scoring-wise, he hasn't had a chance to grow and develop into a scoring threat that can average 20 to 25 points per game. Someone that Scotty Barnes actually reminds me of is Kawhi Leonard, in terms of his defensive game is super strong when he's young, but then he's not given a chance to develop right away offensively because he's behind other guys, and so his offensive game will come around later on in his career. I'm not saying that Scotty Barnes is going to be as good as Kawhi Leonard, but I think with time he could develop into a really good two-way player for the Toronto Raptors, and I think the Raptors have to build around him instead of giving the ball to two guys that are not going to be in the Raptors' future plans. For this entire season, I held out hope that we could actually do something, maybe win a couple play-in games and then make some noise in the first round against a number 1 seed or number 2 seed. But after this season, I'm just kind of disappointed in the Raptors, and I just don't think that this is the team that they need to have to really compete in the future. Just because I think their two best players or two predominant scorers are, like I've said a couple times, getting older. So I think they need to just deconstruct this team and just have Scotty Barnes and OG Anunoby, Gary Trent even, as their future core. Anyways, thank you for watching. God bless you all. I hope you have an amazing day. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more playoff coverage coming up here. And yeah, I'm going to be covering the NHL, NBA, and NFL going forwards, and also possibly a little bit of Major League Baseball as well.